Hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest CyCast, and we want to introduce you to a very special guest in Paul Shirley, one of the most popular players in Iowa State men's basketball history. An All Big 12 selection in 2001, Shirley was a member of two of the most famous and greatest basketball teams in school history, and Iowa State's back-to-back Big 12 championship teams of 2000, 2001, and obviously the 2000 team made the Elite Eight, which is arguably considered one of the greatest teams in school history. After Iowa State, Paul went on to an incredible career as a professional basketball player, playing 9 seasons. Also had a 3-year stint in the NBA, and right now he's having an even more amazing success as a writer. He's authored 4 books, and right now he has started a new project called The Process, which helps find structure for workers and accountability in community, online, and in person. Welcome to the Iowa State CyCast, Paul. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me. That intro sounds impressive.
Well, it is. It is.
Sometimes, it's interesting thing. We're of course, I'm sure, going to talk about the upcoming reunion, and these opportunities to take stock are, I think, helpful and heartening, because when you're in the day to day, like you and I are, it's sometimes hard to realize that,
Yeah.
oh yeah, you have done some things.
You have done some things, Paul, and we're really proud of you as an Iowa State alum. And let's cut to the chase. We have a big reunion coming up.
Hmm.
And it was officially announced a couple weeks ago. The Iowa State Athletics Department is going to honor, like I said in the introduction, two of the greatest basketball teams in school history, back-to-back Big 12 champions. What's the word on the street? Are you guys pretty excited?
Uh, Yeah, I was thinking about. I knew you would answer or ask that question, and I was like, he's gonna ask, "Am I excited?" And the answer is, I'm intrigued to see what happens. Much like as is true for any reunion, right? I've been to many of my high school reunions, and I'm sure people listening or watching can relate. That it's exciting, but it's also there's an element of apprehension,
Yeah.
right? Of wondering how that's going to feel. It has been right. It's 25 years, and that means that each of us has gone through some changes. I can only speak to how I feel about it, and that is that um, I've gone through so many different
Yeah.
lives since then, that there's a part of me that is always a little scared, because when you're back in one of these situations, and I saw this with high school reunions, etc., people
Yep.
sort of expect you to be the person that they knew when you were there. And in the case of us at Iowa State, I was 19 or 20 or 21 years old, and just a different person. So I think it's that part is a little anxiety provoking, but also allows for some fun, because then you can mess with people, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
entertaining. I think they have certain expectations for how you're going to be, and the chance to mess with that is kind of entertaining. So I guess that's the thing I'm excited about, is just seeing how people take me in, take my teammates in, and what is different about each of us.
Well, and the thing is, Paul, is that you're still tight with some of the guys, obviously, and I'm sure there's some other teammates you haven't seen in 25 years. And
Correct.
so, that's what makes reunions a little odd. But I mean, once again, we all know that not everyone will be able to come back.
Hmm.
That's just life. But just the thought to have let's hope 70% of your teammates back in one setting, especially the accomplishments that those teams made, has to be pretty cool for you guys.
It is, and it's also, I think, going to, like, for me, everybody came from such not odd, but differing backgrounds. And that means that we were all going to launch into different trajectories after that. So the fact that we all came from these strange and varied backgrounds, and then have gone on to all of this other stuff, makes it especially in some ways volatile, honestly, where, like, if it were your high school reunion, you knew these people for many, many years, and
Yep.
it's kind
Yep.
of steady. But we were all introduced like little a chemical reaction into this one situation, and then set free to go do a bunch of other stuff. And I think that means that we may have more or a lot less in common than we realize, right? Like
Yep.
sometimes that provokes, like, the sense that, oh, wow, we're actually more alike than we realize, or we don't have more than 6 words to say to each other. With a high school reunion, you have this like shared background of,
Oh, absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know, well, we had that one teacher who was kind of annoying,
Yep.
and we had some coaches who were kind of annoying, so we can bitch about that. But other than that, we don't have a ton of shared experience. It also shouldn't be forgotten that those teams were an interesting collection of parts, in that it was a tumultuous time because Tim Floyd had left, right? Like he was, of course, my coach my freshman and sophomore year. And that meant that a regime kind of moved on. And then Larry Eustachy comes in, and we're almost instantly hyper successful, to the point, like you said, of being one of the best teams in school history. So it felt really immediate and vivid, but that didn't mean necessarily that we had the same base as a Johnny Orr team or something where there had been this slower build. It was kind of instantaneous, and then we all went about our ways, right?
Yeah. Well, and your story is very unique. You came to Iowa State technically as a walk-on, as a National Merit Scholar.
Mm-hmm.
You eventually obviously earned a scholarship because you were really good, but that's how you got there. And you were basically in the 99-2000 season, you were one of the few seasoned veterans. I mean, that was your 4th year in school, I believe, correct? Right?
Yeah. And I had also, I had also been there for Tim Floyd's second to last year, which was when we meaning mostly my teammates, went to the Sweet 16. I didn't have a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
But I had been around. I had seen a little bit of the tradition, I suppose, right? I had been, I don't want to say steeped, because that puts a bit too much emphasis on it. But I had seen how this had built. I had seen how beloved Fred Hoiberg and Julius Mikulik and Lauren Meyer and Hornacek and Greer, like all these guys were. And so I think that impressed upon me also how special it was, right? That we were so good. I mean, I'm actually, it doesn't matter, but I'm working on this book, and there's going to be a fair bit of Iowa State reference. And I was looking
I can't wait, Paul. I can't wait.
I was looking at some of the storylines, because as people can imagine, because I went on to play for so many teams and in so many places, I don't remember a lot of the exact details of Iowa State basketball games. There are like snippets where it comes in, but
sure.
And by the way, that's kind of hard for people sometimes. They're like, "What? This wasn't the most important game of your life." I'm like, "Well, I had to go on and play for money, so there were other games that kind of superseded it."
Yeah.
But I was looking at some box scores, and just the way that the seasons rolled out, and it almost defies reality that we were able to keep winning in some really tough circumstances, right? So not just the usual rigor of a college basketball season, but injuries and having to play against some really good teams. Who knows what the difference between now and then, but because guys weren't leaving as early, there wasn't the NIL. I think teams were just harder to beat when you had to go win at Texas and at Kansas and at Missouri and all of these places. So it is rather remarkable that we were able to pull all of that off.
Yeah. Well, going into that season, which I'm referring to the 99-2000 season, a lot of people didn't know much about Jamal Tinsley. He came from a JUCO out in California. Obviously Pfizer was a really good player as a sophomore. But when did you start feeling as a member of that team like, oh my gosh, we're pretty good. I think we can do something here.
I don't know if it ever hit me, honestly, in that I can't think of those seasons independently, almost. Mm-hmm. Like it's 2 seasons jammed together. And I will never forget, the end of my senior year, so it's the 2000-2001 season, we need to beat Nebraska at home in order to clinch our second straight Big 12 championship. And the team was completely out of psychological gas. There was just nothing left. And we barely held on to beat a pretty mediocre Nebraska team. And then we went on to lose to Baylor in the first round of the NCAA tournament, which everybody was surprised by, but able to forgive and think, well, they'll figure it out in the NCAA tournament. And then, of course, we lost to Hampton in the first round of the NCAA tournament. And so I think that was, in some ways, the first moment where we were able to take a breath and realize what we had done. And I actually, I have had my backs and forths with Coach Eustace and some of his methods, but I think he did a good job of keeping us in the moment of just thinking about all we have to worry about is today's practice and the next game. And while it was maybe not the most fun to never take notice of the fact that we were really good, I think it is part of what drove us to be so successful, was that we were just thinking about the next game, the next practice, the next play, which sounds, it sounds like a cliche, but he did a good job of creating that psychological atmosphere where we weren't really thinking about how high we were ranked or whether we were good. We were always kind of playing as an underdog. And I think that is part of what led us to some success. And, I will just cop to it. Like, a lot of what I talk about now, this is the business I run, is called the process, right? It's helping people see that it's the same in all of life, that if you get too caught up in thinking about the results or the outcomes, that you're in trouble. These are reunions or opportunities to look back at those outcomes and those results. But when you're in the day-to-day, it's just a matter of like falling in love with that day-to-day. I don't know that we were always in love with running our guts out, but we were in love with winning, with overcoming challenges, with working together towards something. And that, I think, had a lot to teach us all for where we would go. Cantrell Horton runs a business outside of Atlanta, helping kids build their ability to be basketball players. And one thing I like about the way he functions is he's not just celebrating the kid that goes on to play in college. He's talking about all of these kids day to day, showing highlights of, okay, this kid learned a drop step or a step back jump shot. Like, how cool is that he's able to manage all of that? I'm, of course, still in touch with Stevie Johnson, and he played forever, even longer than I did after college. And he's been able to stay with it in Los Angeles, California, of all places, which is a long way from Beaumont, Mississippi, that's for sure. It's, I think, served a lot of us well, that we weren't able to, or maybe didn't take those moments to be like, oh yeah, we're pretty good, which is a long answer to your question.
No, it was great stuff, Paul. And, a big win on that year, once again, I'm referring to the first, Big 12 championship season, 99-2000, was the win in Allen Fieldhouse. And I know, as a kid growing up in Kansas like yourself, you were on 5 straight Iowa State teams that beat Kansas, and there's not many people that can say that. Mm-hmm. And especially going down Allen Fieldhouse in 2000, Marcus Fizer hit a ridiculous baseline fadeaway jumper that basically won the game. The game looked like we had no chance. If I remember correctly, Jamal steals the ball twice and converts layups. Boom, Iowa State beats Kansas first time since 1982 in Allen Fieldhouse. Does that game stand out to you? I mean, I know that a lot of the games are, kind of bumble jumble with you, but you had to remember that game. I'm assuming that most of your family was in attendance.
I certainly do, and that's part. So I'm working on something that has to do with that game around the art of focused work, right? And what is sometimes forgotten in that game is that, yes, Marcus hits this amazing shot with something like 6 seconds to go. Yeah. But Jeff Boschee comes down, a guard from Kansas, and he was like 1 for 16 for the day. He comes down and hits like a 35-footer to bring Kansas within 1, right? And so the next play after a bunch of timeouts is Marcus takes the ball out under Kansas's basket. There are, I think, 2 seconds left in the game. And Coach Eustace has drawn up a play for Marcus to heave it over the defense if somebody is guarding the ball. So for basketball people, like, if somebody's guarding the ball, then that means there's going to be room on the other side of the court. And so I actually have watched this recently because I was trying to figure out how to write about this situation. It's kind of amazing that Marcus has the guts to just toss the ball 60 feet in the air to me over half court, and I have to catch it and dribble, because basically I'm trying to either run out the clock or get fouled.
I don't remember this.
So, well, yeah, the only way I would remember it is because I actually watched the video recently, because the thing coming up is what I am going to talk about. So I get fouled. We're up by 1 with basically a second left in the game, and there's another timeout, and so we make a plan. And it can't be lost that when I was a senior in high school, I had gotten good enough to get recruited by various people, and I was rising up the ranks. I was a super late bloomer, so in a lot of ways people didn't know about me. But toward the end of my senior year, it started to get into a bit of, I wouldn't want to say a frenzy, but like among men majors, it was becoming known that I would play somewhere in college. And throughout all of this, I'd had contact with the Kansas coaches because both my parents went there. I grew up 20 minutes from there. I would have done anything to play at Kansas. I cried when they lost in the Final Four to Duke in 1986. I celebrated when they won in 88. I wore Jayhawk stuff my whole life growing up. So anyway, in my senior year, we get the call from Kansas that Roy Williams wants you and your parents to come over and talk to him about maybe going to KU. And I'm over the moon, right? Like, this is the dream come true. My dad has helped me write letters to 70 different colleges all over the country. Most of them said no, and a lot of them just didn't respond. Yeah. But I had this sense, like, I think I can do this. So we go over to Kansas, and I'm, of course, as nervous as you can be, but also kind of anticipating this coronation, as it were. And so we walk in, and Roy Williams just says, "Hey, I appreciate you coming over here. I wanted to tell you that you could come to Kansas as a walk-on, but you'll never play here because you'll be behind too many guys. So I think you should go to Davidson." So I was being recruited by Davidson, future home of Steph Curry. Yep. And I think they were friends with Bob McKillop, who's the most amazing person ever, Bob McKillop. Yep. So this is not, nothing wrong with Bob McKillop, but they were trying to do a favor to him, and they didn't want me to go to Iowa State. They were like, "You don't want to go to there. Floyd just brings in a bunch of guys and then he runs them off and la, 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 la." And I, of course, didn't have the guts to say anything about this. I was just shell shocked because I thought I was coming here to get a scholarship offer. And now I'm leaving being told I'm never going to be good enough to play in the Big 12. So fast forward, whatever it's been, 3.5, 4 years to now, I've gotten fouled. I've got 2 free throws to come in Allen Fieldhouse to effectively seal this win, right? And so I am pretty dead set on making the first one because I just want to make it. It doesn't really matter if I make it, but I want to make it. So I buckle down, and the fans are bouncing around, and I'm able to do that. But then the second free throw I need to miss because we want the time to stop or to start as quickly as possible, because we don't really want it to go out of bounds and then for them to be able to set up a play. So I'm able to miss it correctly so that it bounces, and then Mike Nurse actually gets the rebound, and then the buzzer sounds. But what I've been thinking about all of this time is, what am I going to say to Roy Williams, right? Now, the point I will make in this book that I'm working on is that so much of our lives as workers is this ability to block out all of these distractions and actually do the thing that's right in front of us, right? So I was dealing with the fact that, it's hard to make a free throw in Allen Fieldhouse. It's distracting because there's 16,000 fans yelling at you. Yeah. And I'm filled with self-doubt, right? Like, I don't know if I could do this because Roy Williams once told me I couldn't. So anyway, what happens is I'm thinking, like, do I go over to him and say, like, it looks like I am good enough to play in the Big 12, or do I just drop an F-bomb on him? But what happens, it ends up that our eyes just find each other like a magic bullet through the crowd of people roaming around the court. And he sees me and I see him, and he knows what he told me and I know what he told me. And that was plenty. And that was super cool. But as I was paying attention to that season, what happened next was we actually went off to Colorado, I think on that Saturday, and lost to a Colorado team that had a guy named Jacque Walls who hit a 35-footer to send it to overtime, and we lose in overtime. We come home and we play Texas, and I break my foot in that game.
That's right.
And then we beat Oklahoma State at home, and now things are starting to hit into a crescendo. And this was simultaneously wonderful, but also kind of heartbreaking for me, because now I got to watch as the team goes off and beats, I think, Texas Tech and then Baylor. and then wins the Big 12 tournament. But I'm now rehabbing from this broken foot. And so the point of all of this is that Kansas game was so cool, right? Such a great moment for me. And then where this ends up is only a few weeks later, 4 weeks or something like after this, we are playing Michigan State in the NCAA tournament. And we, of course, lose. And now I'm crying on the sidelines. And I think
that was your first game back, right, Paul?
yeah, well, I think I played a little bit in the Sweet 16 game against UCLA. Yeah,
I got you. Okay.
And then I played a fair bit against Michigan State, and people will remember there's this controversial double foul, and I foul out, and Stacey loses his mind, and then I'm crying on the sideline, and that picture is all over the newspapers. And I've talked about that ad nauseum, but I think it's what was interesting to me is just how that was such a short stint of time, right?
Yeah.
4 weeks from one of the best moments of my life, truly, was winning at Kansas. Just from it's petty maybe, but to get revenge at Allen Fieldhouse, which I had grown up. I mean, we couldn't even afford to go to games when I was a kid, so I would work concessions for the Kiwanis so I could watch half of the game at Allen Fieldhouse. So I beat Roy Williams, but then just as life does and as basketball does, it gets its revenge, and I get so close to this pinnacle. Not just but we get this so close to this pinnacle of playing in the Final Four, and then it gets pulled away, which I think is just a lesson in how those moments are fleeting, and life and basketball have a way of teaching you these lessons along the way.
Absolutely. And once again, we're with Paul Shirley, outstanding basketball player on two of the greatest teams in Iowa State history, and he's a busy man. We're going to try to knock all the questions we can in this 40 minutes. But I do want to reiterate, Paul, once again, next year you go down there and beat Kansas again in Allen Fieldhouse. Mm-hmm. And you were a starter that game. You were one of our best players. And, the thing is do you remember going into now, once again, this is your senior year. Do you remember going down there and what Jamal Tinsley said to the press before the game?
No, what did he say?
They asked him about Allen Fieldhouse, and he said it's just another gym. And what I remember vividly was, oh my God, here I am, I'm your SID, like, oh, here we go, bulletin board, here we go, and you guys went down there and backed it up. Mm-hmm. You guys went down there and backed it up. I remember Contrell Horton making a 40-foot shot at the end of the shot clock from the Kansas logo. But I mean, once again, a kid from Kansas beating Kansas and Allen Fieldhouse back-to-back games. That had been pretty cool.
It was special, and I think that quote from Jamal is emblematic of the attitude that he brought, that Marcus brought, that Coach Eustace brought, which was something of a double-edged sword, right? I think Jamal especially didn't much care whether we were playing at Kansas or at Iowa State or in Lubbock, Texas. But that also meant sometimes it was hard to get him to lock in because he just didn't care. So I think that is a credit, though, to Coach Eustace to be able to pull all of these guys who were either mentally tough or apathetic, which is it kind of it ends up the symptoms of those are basically the same, and get us all aimed in the right direction. I probably cared too much about winning at Kansas. Jamal didn't care at all, whether it was Kansas or Missouri, and that actually worked really well for him and for our team. And I think we were able to, and Coach Eustace was able to captain that ship for like 96% of my junior and senior year. And then like, I can't help but come back to the ending, right? Like where it just, it worked for a long, long time and it worked really well. And then suddenly it just fell off a cliff. And that's how life goes too. Right.
Absolutely.
But I think that's, if Jamal is tough because of a little bit of apathy, then Cantrell is tough just because he's tough, and Stevie's tough just because he's tough. Marcus is just good, and I I don't know where I stood in that realm, because sometimes I was scared out of my mind. A lot of the time I was scared out of my mind. But I felt some sense of pride around just being on the court with these guys who had trained so hard. I remember, again, some home game. I can't remember who we were playing, but I think I was on the court with Martine Rancic and Marcus, and we just kept getting offensive rebounds. And the other team, you could just see in their eyes, they were like, who are these guys? Now, of course, Martine could have played in the NBA and played overseas forever. So part of it was that we were good and we're tall and we're strong. But there was also a relentlessness that I think got bred into us through Coach Eustace. And I also don't want to leave Coach Floyd out of this, right? He had bred some of that. A lot of the fingerprints that, or I would say Coach Floyd's fingerprints are all over the teams that ended up getting built. People forget, the recruiting class he had with Marcus that ended up not coming together because one guy's ineligible, another guy's ineligible because he played briefly professionally in Australia. CJ Bruton, right? The other kid that was ineligible at Iowa State goes on to play at Louisiana Tech and averages 25 a game there. So
Gerard Henderson, right?
Yeah, so I think I think there were a lot of different ways that this could have happened, and it is just I of course speak to Coach Floyd fairly frequently, and with time have realized just how smart he is, how well connected, how humble he is, and how I think in some ways devastating it was that recruiting class didn't come together, because he had kind of behind the scenes orchestrated this really impressive group of people, and then it just kind of fell apart, and then we were real bad my sophomore year.
Yeah, one moment in time in your career, Paul, that I want to talk to you about was when you had the celebration in Hilton Coliseum after you clinched the Big 12 title down in Baylor, and it was a joint celebration with the women because they just clinched the Big 12 title. They just beat Texas, and people don't realize this, but when we joined the Big 12 in 1996, Iowa State didn't win a conference title in any sport until that day. And you guys clinched on the same night. I mean, and let's call it like it is, marquee sport of basketball. Does that day I'm guessing there were 6,000 fans there. I mean, that was incredible, where they celebrated two amazing accomplishments from two different teams. And I know that you were tight with the women's team. And how special was that day in Hilton?
Very special. I think, I mean, that's where this stuff gets lost in the fog, right? I believe you that happened, but I have no idea. So like I could like make something up and be like, oh yeah, that was an amazing day, but I truly cannot remember. And I think that's one thing that is forever a struggle for fans of college sports, right? Because they don't want to hear me say, like, I can't remember that. Because the reality is that we were mercenaries, right? Like, we come to Iowa State and play there for, in my case, 4 years, 5 years. But in Jamal Tinsley's case, 2 years, right? In a lot of cases, a year. I have joked many times that in my 5 years at Iowa State, I played with 49 other players. So an average of 10 new guys every year. And that's not to at all take away from the experience of a fan, right, who was excited because Iowa State just clinched a Big 12 championship. But from my perspective, from Paul's personal perspective, there were so many things after that in basketball that it's just lost, right? And the other thing,
understandable too. I get it. It's very understandable.
And the other thing people forget is, like, I probably had to go to class the next day, and I probably had to like run that night or something like that. Like, when you're in the midst of it, it really is just like put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that, when people ask me about coming back, they're always assuming I will say, well, that was the best time of my life and I can't wait to go relive that. Well, it wasn't the best time in my life. It was hard. It was real hard, right? I had some really tough coaches. My degree's in engineering, of all things. I was hurt most of the time that I was there, right? I had 3 different stress fractures. I had that broken foot. And so there wasn't a lot of time for basking. There wasn't a lot of this sense of like, oh, this is amazing. It's more, as I mentioned before, I think this worked out in our favor. It's more just get to the next thing, right? Like, how do I get through this and get to the next thing? And that's hard for people to understand because they often think that college basketball is like high school basketball player, but on or high school basketball, but on an advanced level. And that's not really the case. It's like being in the military. And so you aren't able to appreciate some of those things until they're done. Most of my relationships with the women's basketball team were them coming off the court and me wishing that I was them because I could be done practicing, or watching them stand on the sidelines to get ready to come on to practice and thinking, okay, that means practice is about over. So I'm going to get to go home to my dorm room and rest right now. And I think that's, I know that's not the purpose of CyCast, right? Like, mostly you just want to hear like all of the great things that happened. But from my perspective, it was a trippy time in my life, formative, good for me. And I'm ultra appreciative of Iowa State fans and of the experience, right? That it was a bit of a crucible for me and turned me into the person that I became. But that doesn't mean it was fun most of the time.
Yeah. Well, life's hard, Paul. We all know that. It's not easy. And if it was, everyone would be pretty happy.
Yeah. Well, I do want to just mention it was an honor to get to play at Iowa State. So I don't want to take away from that. But in order to be excellent at these things, there's an element of discipline and drive that makes things not fun any longer, but more purposeful. So we had a purpose, but we weren't necessarily happy along the way.
Yeah. Well, then I promise you, I'm only going to ask you one more question about a game. And if you don't remember it, I'm not going to take offense.
Okay.
Now, this is your senior year. Do you remember the Nebraska game at Nebraska?
Is that when Martine made the – yes.
There you go.
I do remember that. Yes, that is. Although it's interesting. So one time when I was a kid, I think I said, "Oh, I remember that thing," and my mom was like, "No, you just remember the photos of it, which you have seen in a photo book." So I wonder if I actually just remember the replay of it. But anyway, yes, I do know what you're talking about.
Do you remember kind of the crazy ending where?
Yes, there's it's basketball. It's heavy basketball terminology, but there's a slip screen by Martine, and it was and it saved the day, right? Like if we had not won that game, I don't know that we win the Big 12.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, Paul, because it was such a critical win because I think we were 1-2 or 2-2 at the time, and going on 2-3. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it certainly appeared that Iowa State was going to lose the game. But for fans out there, Iowa State was down 1.5 seconds. Tinsley's taking the ball out of bounds. So the chances of pretty hard, and it was a slip screen to Martine, and a perfect pass. Martine grabs it, lays it in at the buzzer. And what was hilarious about the whole scenario was we think we win, and then all of a sudden they say the shot didn't count, then Nebraska wins. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden now they look at the clock, and then Iowa State wins. I think there was like 4 different times where Nebraska thought they won, Iowa State thought they won, Nebraska thought they won, then Iowa State. But anyway, it was a key part of that season because, like I said, I mean, it could have been a 2-3 start in the Big 12, and who knows? But you're right. You guys kept moving after that.
Well, and I think that embodies that mentality that Coach Floyd, Coach Eustace were able to instill. I'm a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Because I grew up in Kansas. Yeah. The Chiefs have won, whatever it is, 3 of the last 5 Super Bowls, which is kind of insane. When I played for the Phoenix Suns, there was this knock on Mike D'Antoni, after that year, because the Suns would often make it to the playoffs but not win at all.
Yeah.
That he was a coach who couldn't, quote, win at all. If we go back to the Kansas City Chiefs, there's a world where those Kansas City Chiefs have not won a single Super Bowl in the last 5 years.
Yep.
The point here is all you can do is put yourself into a position to have a chance, right? Like that's what great teams do. That's what the Patriots did for a really long time. When the Boston Red Sox were really good, that's what they did for quite a while. When my Kansas City Royals were great in the 80s, that's what they did. You have to put yourself into a position where luck sometimes will bounce your way and sometimes it won't. And I think fans struggle with that because they think you can control every little dial down the stretch.
Yeah.
The reality is there's a world where we're not having this conversation at all because my junior year, Iowa State is 20-11, and my senior year we're 22-8, and it's like good, but it's not great. It's not, nobody's going to remember it. So that's where I think some humility is in order for me and for my teammates to understand that in some ways we did get a little lucky, right? That things bounced our way a few times. I mean, if Jamal throws that pass half a foot one direction or the other, it doesn't go like it did. And I do think that we can all get caught up in thinking like, well, weren't we special and weren't we wonderful? I think what we were special at was staying at it day after day, having enough guys who were strong enough, tough enough, and resilient enough to keep going. And then some things bounced the right way. And then sometimes they didn't, right? Like we of course lose to, as we mentioned, we lose to Michigan State because of some weirdness. Jamal misses a layup at the end of the game against Hampton, and we don't beat Hampton. That's how those things go. But the thing that matters is we put ourselves into that position where we had a chance each time.
Yeah. Well, and obviously, if anyone has followed Paul Shirley's career, he's been just as successful as an author. And if you haven't read his books, you should. They're great books. Can I Keep My Jersey? The Ball Boy, The Process, and I think Stories I Tell on Dates. I think I got it right, didn't I?
You did. And so like writing is actually, not to belabor this, but writing is so similar, right?
Yeah.
Any creation, any creative act, you cannot control in the world of creativity whether someone reads your books or listens to your albums or looks at your art. All you can control is, did I put myself into a position where they might be able to? My first book, Can I Keep My Jersey, has sold the most copies by a lot. It is not my best book, but that doesn't matter, right? Like it's more about did I put myself into a position where people had the opportunity to read a book of mine? I can't control whether they do, just like we couldn't really control whether we won at Nebraska.
Yeah. Well, Paul, I know you're a busy man, and we're going to wrap this up, and I can't thank you enough. And, once again, we're so excited to see you all here in January. But the last question I have before we leave is, when was the last time you were in Hilton Coliseum?
I was there for sure. I was actually, I think, touring Stories I Tell on Dates.
Okay, that's
that
right.
may be the last time. So probably it's been 6 years or something like that. But I haven't been back much. Stevie and I actually ended up back there together for our first game back. It's probably been 10 years now.
Okay.
But it is certainly trippy to see it from the perspective of a fan, just because I didn't grow up in Iowa, so it's not like I went to Iowa State games, and so to see it from the other side is great, but also unsettling because the same neurons want to fire, and there is that lament of, I'm not the kid out on the court playing anymore.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk to you. And once again, Iowa State fans, they're going to be really happy to see all you guys again, and we can't wait. And really appreciate you joining the CyCast.
I am glad that we could do this and that we could also commemorate this length of hair, because by then it's either going to be even longer and weirder looking or completely shorn and Republican looking. We'll see.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul.